and welcome to the AniMonday podcast. My name is Colin Hemphill.
And I'm Kayla Hemphill.
On our show, we roll the virtual dice each week and must watch a randomly selected anime title. Thanks for joining us. Last week, we hit the random button on Crunchyroll, and the anime that we rolled was the Monogatari series. Monogatari is a long-running series of light novels. There are 24 total since they started in 2006, and there are plans for at least 5 more. The writer is named Nisio Isin, which is a palindrome, which is awesome. And it was illustrated by a Taiwanese illustrator named Vofon. This series is released in different arcs that involve wordplay. So there are series like Bakemonogatari, Nisei Monogatari, Neko Monogatari, and others. The production company Shaft created several anime adaptations based on these light novels, and the first one that they produced is Bakemonogatari. So it's sort of the first canonically, and it's a complicated running series, but that's the one that we decided to start with as a result. Bakemonogatari is a portmanteau of bakemono, which is a type of yokai, kind of like what we would call a ghost or a monster. And monogatari means story, so it sort of means ghost story or something like that. Shaft is an animation studio that's known for using unusual animation styles and visual gags with a sort of avant-garde way of telling stories. And they actually now exclusively work with a single director named Akiyuki Shinbo, who was the director for this series. And both the director and the studio are also known for major projects like Madoka Magica. We're going to be discussing the first 5 episodes in depth, and we'll try to avoid major spoilers. This show is built around short stories that are each told over the span of 2 or 3 episodes apiece. In this case, the first 2 episodes tell one story, and episodes 3 through 5 tell a different story.
A third-year high school student named Koyomi used to be a vampire, and some of the effects of his immortal life still linger. As a result, Koyomi often finds himself at the center of paranormal activities and spends much of his time helping people who are affected by these entities, such as apparitions, deities, ghosts, mythological beasts, and spirits. In these stories, we meet Hitagi, whose weight is taken by a crab-like entity, and a young girl named Mayoi, who is never able to reach her destination. So
this series is very character-driven, kind of similar to last week, except that...
It's good?
No, I wasn't going to say that. Oh, by the way, Kayla finished Love Tyrant already,
it was awesome.
It seemed to kind of end on a, I don't know, it didn't feel like it really wrapped up all that much.
No, it kind of left on an ambiguous, like...
Could probably use a second season, sort of.
Maybe.
Anyway, back to this show. It's very character-driven, but that said, the entire premise of the show is that it's telling these short stories in segments. And so the interplay between the characters and the story that it's trying to tell is really important. What did you think of kind of the main character? He's actually consistent through all the series from Bakemonogatari on. His last name is what they usually refer to him as, but we are unable to pronounce that because it's just not sounds that really work in English. So
yeah, it's also funny. They do kind of make reference to that a little bit with one of the characters being unable to pronounce his name. Yeah,
he has a succession of 2 similar characters in his name, which is R, and one of the characters continually messes that up, mostly on purpose.
Yeah, he was kind of an interesting character. I'm not sure totally what to make of him. Because there's times when he is played off as kind of dense, but other times totally the opposite. And it seems like they kind of wrestled with his character of trying to decide if he's wise and knows all these things versus has no idea what's going on.
I also noted kind of the same thing. In fact, we've talked many times about the ahoge and how it kind of indicates a dumb character, which he is very prominent ahoge in this show.
It's like its own character in itself.
And kind of what I was gathering, at least from these few episodes that we've seen, is that all the other characters treat him like a moron.
Yes.
And the show itself treats him like he's kind of brilliant.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
So everyone in the show is very intellectual.
Yes.
It's just an incredibly detailed, very high level sort of philosophical thing that happens in the show. And so even the dumbest character in this show, which would be the main character, is played as someone who's really articulate and really intelligent. And it seems like his only problem is that he revealed at one point in the show that once he got to high school, he started doing poorly in school. His grades just fell off.
Yeah.
But he's still a really intelligent person.
Yeah, he's still able to engage in the verbal banter with all the other characters. So it seems strange sometimes that he's even animated with kind of like a blank face, like he has no idea what's going on.
Yeah. His whole story is that he is a former vampire. And I kind of thought it was interesting that they threw you into the story without giving you all that back information.
Yeah, we have no idea how he became a vampire.
We haven't seen anything about that. And
how he stopped becoming a vampire.
Sure. All we know is that he has this weird friend who we'll talk about later who kind of is involved in all these paranormal activities and helped him reverse the effects of the vampirism. So right now, he just kind of has some superhuman abilities. We see him able to heal himself of wounds and, I don't know, other things. He had like a zoom-in vision at one point. He could see really far away.
Yeah, there's been a couple of times, too, when his eyes will just suddenly go red. And it's supposed to show some lingering effect of his old affliction, but they don't always explain what's going on.
He also has two sisters who we see a few times, and he talks about them, but otherwise they haven't been primary characters yet, so I don't know if there's anything to say about them.
No, they just seem like two normal younger sisters. We don't see his parents at all. He talks about them, but we don't see them. Yeah.
One of the first other characters we meet is Tsubasa, who is the class president of the class that he is in. We also don't spend a whole lot of time with her. But what we do know is that she has visited his friend before. This guy, Oshino, who kind of takes care of paranormal activities and helps people get out of them or help them through the effects of those situations.
Sure.
We know that she has seen him before to have something worked on, but we didn't get any of that either.
No, which I think is part of, we chose to start with this series. I think some of the other companion parts of the show actually go into different backstories, and I think hers is one of the ones that they go back in time and show what happened to her.
I think chronologically, Bakemonogatari isn't technically the first in the series, but it's kind of based on release order at least. The first story that we're told about kind of centers around a character whose name is Senjo Gahara. We see her first falling off of basically a balcony in their school.
Yeah.
And she is descending down a staircase. I'm not really sure why she was falling or anything.
The banana peel.
Oh, right. Yeah,
she slipped on a banana peel.
Of course.
We don't see that, so it wasn't comical.
She just mentions it and is like, oh, those darn banana peels. But the main character sees her falling and for some reason decides it would be a good idea to try to catch her.
Well, it seems like he was in direct path to, because where she lands, he didn't go out of his way to catch her. She literally just lands in his arms.
But when he does catch her, he finds that she is super light. She weighs basically nothing. And she goes on to talk about how she is weightless because of a crab.
Yes. That she encountered.
And as we kind of come to find throughout the series is that there are a number of entities, like you talked about in the intro, that are responsible for interactions with humans. They could be gods, they could be ghosts, they could be any number of things.
Yeah.
They often just refer to them as apparitions.
Yeah.
And so she encounters this crab, and he takes her weight away from her.
Yes.
And she weighs 5 kilograms. Another interesting thing about her is that she has a weapon of choice. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so she carries many different types of weapons on her. They're all school supplies. So they're like scissors and pens and stuff like that. But the one she uses the most is a stapler.
Yep.
Which, I was thinking about it more, I think is related to the crab. It's like the pinchers, right?
Yeah.
I was thinking about it and I was like, it's like the crab pinchers.
Right.
But she staples people's faces.
She does.
Mm-hmm.
She can basically summon this large Swiss Army knife covered in office supplies from her hands.
Yeah, and it would like fall out of her dress.
Yep. We briefly talked about Oshino. He is a kind of weird middle-aged guy.
Yeah.
Who lives in a house somewhere, and he's kind of isolated.
Well, it's not even a house. It's like a old building.
Yeah,
that's
some
vacated.
Decrepit old vacated building. He wears a Hawaiian shirt with the buttons undone, so you get a good ab shot. And for some reason, he knows a lot about the paranormal stuff that goes on in this town.
Yeah.
And so he's kind of the go-to for all the characters whenever they're having some kind of thing that they need to address.
He had mentioned briefly at one point that he had like went to school for priesthood.
He was in the Shinto priesthood,
yes.
which
yes.
I am meant to do some research on that, but I didn't get a chance to. So
he has some training. He's not just like the local crazy guy or anything like that.
He said he's no longer active in that priesthood, and now
Right.
he's just kind of a free agent doing this kind of work. And he charges a lot of money for it.
A lot of money he
which
charged.
I guess be close to like $10,000 that he charged her.
Yeah, and then he charged
Koyomi.
Yeah, he charged Koyomi like
half as much.
No, I thought it was more. I thought he said 5 million yen.
Maybe. Either way, because it specifically had to do with vampirism.
Yeah, that's why he got
upset,
was because he's like, you charged them so much less than mine.
The next character that we meet is Mayoi, who is a grade schooler, and she's kind of the center of the second story.
Yeah. Yeah, so she got the 3 episodes to cover her. And she's kind of interesting when we first meet her because she's lost, and the main character is trying to figure out where she's trying to go, and Mayoi is just pushing him away, saying like, I hate you, I don't like you, like go away, don't bother me. And she starts actually to become a little violent with him, and it's it's not until they get into like a big fight, and Koyomi is like, he tackles her to the ground because I think he punched her in the stomach, and that's when she suddenly becomes friendly to him and lets him help her find her way. But one of the things I noticed about her is that she tends to not retain information. So she is the character that frequently mispronounces the main character's name, and he'll tell her no, this is how you're supposed to say it. You're adding an extra character in there. And she'll kind of laugh it off, and then the next time she says his name, she'll probably say it wrong again. And so it seemed like she doesn't really carry new information with her.
And to get us kind of into talking about the story, let's start there and kind of work backwards to the first set of episodes.
Okay.
So we come to find out that this grade schooler is actually the apparition itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Not that she has been affected by an apparition, but that she is the one.
Yeah, she's the spirit.
Yeah. She had talked about meeting a snail.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some wordplay in her name. I don't remember all of this, but it
has to do with a cow. Kanji for cow is
includes
also
a cow kanji in there.
In the word for snail,
yep.
In the kanji for snail.
So one of the characters keeps calling her the cow.
Yeah, the lost cow.
And her name actually, I think, translates to a wanderer or a lost, something like that.
Yeah.
It turns out that it's not that she met the snail and the snail is the one who made her lost or unable to go home. She's trying to go home to see her mother, basically.
Mm-hmm.
She is actually the entity who is affecting Koyomi, because once he starts interacting with her, he's no longer able to go home.
Yeah, so when they get the address from Mayoi, they start kind of walking towards what should be her mom's house, and they keep overshooting it. And they're like, that's weird. Why did we miss it? And every time that happens, they cannot find their way back.
Yeah, so I thought that was a pretty interesting reveal in the way that played out.
Mm-hmm.
At one point, she calls Koyomi Mr. Man-Beast, which was pretty much my favorite.
Yeah. Was that after or before he beat her up?
That was before.
He beats her up twice, by the way. So it's not like it was a one-time thing. Twice.
Big, makes her unconscious, sort of beats her up in broad daylight.
To be fair, she did bite him so hard, it took a chunk out of his hand.
During his interactions with Mayoi, Shinjugohara is actually there with them. She's also trying to find the home with them and walking around. We come to find out that she could never see the little girl to begin with.
No.
It was just Koyomi who could see her and interact with her.
Which, realizing, when they reveal that she's a spirit, that it's because he didn't want to go home. He was avoiding things. And that's what that snail spirit does, is it prevents people from being able to find their way. It seeks people who have some aversion to going home. Mm-hmm.
In the end, they're able to basically find the home that she was supposed to go to, which was demolished years ago.
Mm-hmm.
It turns out she had died 10 years ago or something.
Yeah.
And the reason that she became this entity was that she was on her way home to see her mother and I think died in a car accident. I think a bus or something hit her. And that's what turned her into this spirit whose purpose is to find people in similar situations.
It was interesting, actually, how they overcame it. They decided to take totally different routes that she wouldn't know, so they took brand new streets as opposed to the old streets that were still intact. And then because she was lost, they were able to actually get her to the lot that her house used to be on.
And this is where I think I was really impressed by the depth of storytelling.
Yes.
And the way that the characters unveil information as you learn more about them.
Mm-hmm.
So this little girl, her parents divorced and she lived with her father. And her only desire was to go see her mom.
Yeah.
And not that she didn't like her dad also, but...
No. She just missed her mom.
Mm-hmm. And it kind of turned out to be the same for Koyomi, who it happened to be Mother's Day, and he was kind of mad at his mom at the moment and didn't want to go see her go home.
And his sisters.
And his sisters, who were bugging him a bunch. And his sisters kind of felt like he wasn't attached to his mom the way he should be.
Yeah, that he should care more.
Okay, so stepping back to Shinjugohara's story, the reason that she was super light is because she encountered this crab entity who stole her weight. Do you want to talk about her story at all?
I love her story. When we were watching it, as I was figuring it out, I was getting more and more excited.
It does check all the boxes for things you're very interested in.
Yes, it does. So we come to find out that Hitagi, that's her first name, because I can't say her last name.
Sorry, I'll stick with Hitagi.
She lives with her dad because her mom got involved with a cult after Hitagi got really sick in middle school, needed surgery or she was going to die. And her mom gets involved in this cult that starts to take advantage of them, both financially and then, as we come to find out, physically and sexually. And when one of the cult leaders comes and tries to take advantage of Hitagi, she attacks back and causes a whole lot of physical damage to this person. And her mom doesn't defend her. Her mom goes back to the cult and leaves the family. And she carries a lot of guilt because of that. So when she encounters the crab goes to take that weight away from her, that burden.
Yeah, they get together with Oshino and he orchestrates this big meeting where he's going to force the crab deity to show up again so that she can face him.
Yeah.
And it's kind of at that moment that you realize she's not talking about a physical weight, although that did affect her physical weight.
Right.
But
an emotional weight.
What she actually has to let go of is the emotional weight of that burden and that load that she's carried for so long.
Well, I think it's actually the opposite. Is that she needed to take it on.
Right. She had rid herself of the emotional weight.
Yes.
So that she could move on with her life. But
yeah, and it was interesting because her personality shifted because of it. So one of the things that the Tsubasa, the class rep, talks to Koyomi about is that, Hitagi used to be this really sweet and popular girl. She was very, very friendly, and now she's completely isolated. And they attribute that to saying that, oh, well, she got sick and she's just still sick. And so her personality becomes very callous. She's very cut and dry with people and not very emotive. She's just flat, like the whole time that you see her.
Oshino calls her a tsundere because she's very cold and doesn't really show her interests.
And as soon as she encounters the crab again, she at first is like blown over by the crab, literally. And they're like, oh, well, I guess we have to like get rid of this crab. That's the only way she's going to be better. And she steps in and is like, no, like I can do this. And she pleads to the crab to give her back all those feelings, all those memories so that she can bear that burden so that she can move on. And she wants to remember, even though it hurts her, she wants to remember her mom and the pain that caused her. And as soon as it was a really cool animation, which I'm sure we'll get into later, the crab literally is covered in kanjis, which I don't know if it just says crab. It didn't translate, so I don't know. But all of those leave the crab and envelop her. And then she's starting to be emotive again. And she just cries and cries. And then we continue to see her through the other episodes. And she is different. Like, she's much more expressive. She's much more friendly. And she actually has emotions.
Well, you hinted at kind of the presentation of this show and the animation.
Yes.
It is certainly a very strong point for this show and something I'm really excited to talk about. Because so far we've kind of had just your generic looking shows where everything was a character just looked a certain way and all of the environments kind of matched and there wasn't a whole lot of variety. When you start going through the episodes. This is very different.
Totally different. Yeah, at times it was almost overwhelming in a good way, but
I think, in a way that it's meant to be.
Yeah, there was just so much happening. It was hard to catch it all, I'm sure it's one of those things you go back and watch it a few times and you find new things each time that you watch it.
Yeah, thinking about the fact that this was made by the same director and studio who did Madoka Magica, you can see a lot of the same sorts of things, even though Madoka is more straightforward. It's less avant-garde and experimental, but there's a lot of like scenes that are in paper mache for no reason, or like when he holds a phone out, it's a real phone, and there's animations happening around the phone, but it's a actual photograph of a phone.
Yeah.
And there's all sorts of changes in animation styles and different techniques that they use throughout the series that just wildly varied.
Oh, yeah. One of the things that was a reoccurring kind of, I guess, stylistic thing that they did was they kind of look like cue cards that would be spliced into the animation. Sometimes they'd be translated, sometimes they wouldn't. But they'd just be these kind of one color with kanji written on them cards that were saying something, usually in the place of like an emotive thing.
Yeah. Sometimes it was equivalent to like an animation for this goes here.
Yeah. Yeah.
A lot of that reminded me of like late Evangelion, quick flashes of information, especially when the show first starts out.
Oh, yes.
You have no idea what's happening. There's so much text on the screen.
Yes, and it goes by so fast.
Even,
There's no way to read it.
No, even for a native speaker who reads the language, there's not enough time there to ingest anything. And so I told Kayla before we started watching, based on the little bit that I know of this series, don't try to ingest everything. You're not gonna get the whole show.
Sure.
And maybe it's kind of like Fooly Cooley, where the more you watch it, the more it kind of starts to make sense, or at least you pretend that it does.
That's probably more accurate.
But yeah, there was the first scenes that we saw on the show are very different than any of the stuff we saw actually play out.
Yeah.
There was a lot of, and maybe actually this was just a recap of like how he got to be a zombie.
Yes.
Or not a zombie,
a vampire.
Mm-hmm. But there did appear to be like a lot of violence and people, chopping arms off and stuff. And none of that happens in the show.
No.
It was all just kind of a precursor that didn't really make sense.
No. No, yeah, there were characters that we hadn't seen and continued to not see in the 2 arcs that we went through. And then, like I said, there would be these, they looked like recaps, I almost called them slides, but cards that would come up, but they move so fast. And those were translated, but there was no way to read them because they only had them on screen for a second or 2, and they would just blow right through them. So on one hand, it was kind of frustrating for me because I felt like you were handing me the information, but purposely taking it away so that I couldn't have it. But it did help to know, like, going into the series, like, okay, I'm not going to catch everything. I have to accept that this is like an art style that they're purposely utilizing. It's not intended for me to not catch it.
You can tell even from the naming of the show and the naming of the episodes and the series that there's a very heavy reliance on understanding of kanji and wordplay.
Yeah.
And a lot of things that we probably missed
Yeah.
As non-native speakers.
Yeah.
But in general, there's so much text
Yes.
all the time.
Yeah.
There is the constant dialogue because the majority of the show is talking.
Yeah, there's not really a whole lot of action.
Sure.
It's people standing around and talking.
Yeah. And that on top of the fact that they put text everywhere in the environments.
Yes, yes.
On people's eyeballs, on chalkboards behind the characters, on every single object can be a place where they find somewhere to put text and insert part of the story.
Yes, I was about to say, it's not just like background text, if you see a street sign or something. It's intended to be a part of the story. It's revealing something to you or giving hints to something that's going on.
Let's talk quickly about the introductions for each show, which every subsection, so every story that they tell, the first 2 episodes and then the next 3, both had their own opening animation.
Yes, that were strikingly different from each other.
Very different. The first one involves a lot of staplers.
Yes. Yes, it does.
It's more or less like an animation of a stapler going throughout the environment and leaving staples in a trail everywhere. And then the second animation that we see is a very, very over-the-top,
it's so cute,
crazy, happy, cute animation of the young girl that we meet interacting with herself. Millions of them.
Yeah, as though she populated the world with copies of herself.
Yeah.
But the music was also very different in both of those. Yep. And so you could tell, even just by looking at it, that the 2 characters that they were focusing on in each of those arcs were remarkably different from the other one. It was actually kind of a shock to go into episode 3 and see how crazy different the intro was. And we were like, oh, what is happening here? This is going to be very different.
Which you touched on music. All the music, as far as I can tell, is done by Meg Rock, which is a popular artist. She does a lot of anime stuff.
Oh, great.
And the fact that those 2 intro songs were so different, despite being the same artist, really shows that the director had a huge influence on what they were doing in the show.
Yeah, well, even if we can go into it, even inside the show, there was a lot going on musically. Something that I noticed is that there was a lot of thematic music going on. So each character kind of had their own theme music throughout.
Yeah, the prime example I can think of is Oshino, who anytime he came in, there was like slide guitars and there was a harmonica.
Yeah, very bluesy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and at one point, I think it was Hitagi had like metal music that came up, especially when she was like...
Yeah, when she was brandishing her weapons at him.
Yeah. So I thought that was great. That's something that you don't really see a whole lot in anime, is really taking the time to like develop the characters, not just through their animation, through their dialogue, but also musically. You could feel the character through the music. And then even when they change, their music alters. So Hitagi's music ended up changing as her character changed, and that was really interesting to me.
The kind of general score that happened in scenes that weren't necessarily related to a specific character kind of remind me of Death Note's score a little bit.
Okay.
If you remember any of that. Or more recently, like Breath of the Wild.
Oh, yes. Okay.
Which has a very sparse sort of score. And it repeats a lot. It's mostly the same theme kind of played over and over, but it never gets draining or feels repetitive. It's just a really good underscore for the dialogue that's happening.
Yeah, definitely.
Whether that's a soft piano or some strings or whatever they chose for each scene.
Yeah.
Talking about generally the animation styles, they kind of had a default that they went to in terms of the way that they drew everything, which was that the characters are very flat. They have kind of very few colors to them and not much shadow or depth. And then they have very thick outlines, which are usually colorful. So a bright red outline or something like that. And then the environment around them is very three-dimensional.
Yes.
They will move around in a 3D space, and oftentimes when the camera is doing interesting things, they'll zoom in on a face, and that character is suddenly three-dimensional now. But I'm looking at it generally as far as you made the reference to Wes Anderson.
Yes, I did.
Or even a Coen Brothers sort of thing, where there's a very heavy emphasis on the camera work as well, which is unusual in anime.
Yeah, when we were watching it, I had told Colin, I was like, this feels more like a movie than it does just like a show. And specifically that feel of like Wes Anderson or the Coen Brothers, who put a lot of emphasis on camera work. Because, like Colin was saying, there were times when the characters are just talking and the camera is actually doing the, like, emotion for you. It's, like, showing you where to look and how you should be feeling. So, in the second arc, especially, most of it takes place in one area, which is kind of like a playground area.
Yeah.
And it's not a very big playground. There's not a whole lot going on, but throughout that arc, you actually don't feel like you're in the same place over and over again because they change the angles and it feels new as new information is revealed. It's like more gets expanded upon.
Did you also notice how they chose a very intentional color palette for each series of episodes?
Oh, yeah, definitely. It was totally different from the first arc to the second arc.
The first arc was very red.
Yes.
Everything was dark and intense, and there was just red everywhere. Like the little text shots that would come up would be on a red background with white text or something, and a lot of the buildings and the clothing that they wore and all sorts of choices were reds. In the second set of episodes, it was all yellow.
Yeah, the playground was yellow. And the houses that they were walking through were yellow. And even there would be like a range of yellows. So there'd be like the really bright, vibrant yellow that you would see at like a playground, to like very, very pale yellow. It's almost whites that you would see. Did
you have any thoughts on the character designs?
I super love what they did with the character designs, especially when it comes to Mayoi. So I talked before about how Hitagi had the staplers and it was like the crab claws. Part of the reason why I figured that out is because Mayoi is drawn like a snail.
Right.
Which eventually they emphasize and they really reveal to you how much of a snail she looks like. But I remember catching it with Colin being like, wait a minute, and being like, oh, because she has these pigtails that are kind of like antennae. And then she has this big, ginormous backpack that she wears that is like the shell. And so when I started figuring out, I kept thinking about how they actually designed their characters to look like the spirits or whatever that they're encountering.
In a really subtle way, too.
Yeah,
we didn't catch on to the snail thing, even though they kept calling her a snail the whole time.
Yeah.
And talking about snails. Mm-hmm. She just looked like a grade schooler. Yeah. Like going off to school. Or obviously she had a huge backpack.
Comically large.
Because she was like... She had packed to go see her mom and probably spend the week with her or whatever. So yeah, I thought that was really good.
Yeah, and then like and Hitagi was even more subtle. Like I don't think I would have caught the stapler crab claws thing unless they had done something similar with Mayoi.
What are your closing thoughts and likes and dislikes?
One of the things, we've kind of touched on it a little bit. One of the things I really loved about the pacing of this show is that when we jump in, we're just thrown into their lives and the characters will reveal information about themselves, but they're not giving you a whole bunch of exposition. It feels very natural, like what you would tell a stranger. You wouldn't tell them your whole backstory about how you became a vampire and how you got cured from that. And he doesn't go into it. He's just like, yeah, I recently got cured from this, so I know that I can help you. And that was it. They never talk about it really again. And I like that because that felt normal to me. Do I want to know more? Yes, of course. But that's part of it, is I'm interested and I'm invested in these characters because I don't know every single tiny little detail about them.
We had talked about how the majority of the show, the vast majority, is two people talking.
Yes.
Just chatting.
Yeah.
Even when there are three characters present, it's almost always two at a time.
Yes.
And it's really fascinating how engaging they can make that simple premise.
Yeah. Yeah, we were pretty locked in the whole time without there having to be flashy, action sequences or anything like that.
The show reminds me a lot of a couple other projects, things like Tatami Galaxy, or what was the other one I was thinking of? Mind Games, which is a film, or Fooly Cooly, which we mentioned before. The issue that I have is that Fooly Cooly I am very invested in because it has an amazing dub.
Sure.
And I don't think I could invest in it the same way if it were just the subtitled version.
Yeah.
Because there's so much in that show that requires cultural knowledge and understanding of language and things like that I, as a native English speaker, just can't wrap my head around.
Yeah. And it doesn't always translate properly to English because, certain things that make sense in Japanese because of the kanji or even the way that the words sound, if you translate it into English, those words may not sound similar. And so some of those things could definitely they even got lost when we were reading the sub.
Yeah. So I actually gave up on Tatami Galaxy at some point because it's such a flood of information. And the fact that they don't have a dub version means that the way that I ingest it is exhausting. And I started to feel the same way about this show. As much as I wanted to keep going and keep pushing and understand it better and invest in the characters and the stories that they're telling, it's such a flood of information that it makes it really difficult. And add on top of that the layer of every single thing that they say is some kind of pun or wordplay that doesn't translate.
Yeah, which is something that we've talked before about how Japanese people really love word games. And you'll see that a lot in different animes of kids or even adults like playing these word games with each other. And that's something that is very prevalent in this series. One of the other things I really liked about this show that it's kind of hard to put into words, so I'm going to try my best.
Okay.
I love how tangible they made everybody's trauma. So a lot of, or at least these first 2 arcs, have to deal with some sort of trauma in some way. Hitagi's is pretty obvious. The abandonment and the abuse that she faced is tangible as weight, and that physical weight is removed from her and then is then given back to her. And so it's interesting to watch how they are dealing with their trauma and then subsequently how they end up processing it. That's kind of the story in itself, too, is figuring out, like, how they deal with that. And then even with Mayoi, of explaining, like, why she was visiting her mom and subsequently why she had that feeling of being lost. It was much more than that she got lost on her way to her mom's house. It was that she felt like she was losing her mom because she couldn't recognize her face. And they did this all in very tangible ways. And even with Mayoi not actually being the entity that encountered the spirit, but is the spirit herself, and Koyomi being the one that's having to process his emotional baggage, it was just very interesting to see it in a very tangible way.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense.
Mm-hmm.
You did a good job.
Thanks.
Would you watch more of this?
So I'm going to take your answer from last week and say maybe.
Okay.
Not because I'm not invested in the show. It's just that it's, like you were saying, it's draining. Not only because you're having to process all the information, it's also emotionally draining because they're talking about these really heavy subjects. This is not a light, casual watch.
No.
This is something you have to go in and say, I'm going to sit down and watch this show and really soak it in. So if I feel like up for that, then absolutely, this would be a great show to watch. I just probably wouldn't do it on a casual basis.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And it's probably why this show has been on my watch list for probably 5 years now. I actually, at one point when they were in the middle of premiering one of the new series, I don't remember which one it was,
Mm-hmm.
but I watched a couple of those, even though it was kind of right in the middle of all of it.
Sure.
And I was like, man, this is right up my alley. Mm-hmm. And immediately added Bakemonogatari to come back to it at some point.
Yeah.
But I knew that there had to be a good reason for me to want to watch it.
Yeah, it's an investment
Mm-hmm.
with a great payout, but an investment nonetheless.
Yeah. So I think for me personally, it's a yes, because that investment is worth it to me. This kind of, the whole package of the good storytelling and the characters and coupled with amazing animation. It is draining, and I'm willing to take it slowly, but I definitely am interested in seeing more.
Yeah, cool. So if you want to learn more about our show, you can visit our website at animonday.moe. That's animonday.moe. You can send us questions or comments to podcast@animonday.moe. And you can find us on Facebook or on Twitter. Our username is AniMondayCast, and you can find links for that on our website.
Thank you to Crunchyroll for the nearly infinite repository of anime that you've provided, and for the random button, which produces those wonderful and wonderfully terrible results. Also, Crunchyroll, if you are interested, it would be most welcome to add the random button to Verve as well.
Yeah, that would super help us out.
Verve is a great service that packages Crunchyroll and Funimation and tons of other things that we watch, like Geek and Sundry and Nerdist and all of that sort of stuff. And you can find that at vrv.co. That gives you all of that for just $10 a month. It's really great. But it is still lacking the random button, so that would be lovely. Or open an API so that I can write one. That'd be nice, too.
Oh, gosh.
Thanks also to C2A for providing the intro and outro music for our show. Those come from the Senpai EPs, which are available on his Bandcamp and other major streaming services. I'll add links in the show notes and on our website.
All right, are you ready to roll?
I'm ready. Oh man, I'm suddenly nervous about the roll. Last week we had one that I actually recognized, and it was right up my alley, and now it could be anything. Random button in 3, 2, 1. Our show for this week is called Our Love Has Always Been 10 Centimeters Apart.
And the first episode is called Spring, First Love, Color of Cherry Blossoms. Yes.
Good. All right. Is this our first romance show?
I'm excited.
well, we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, we'll see you next week, guys.
Thanks. See you next week.